This is Captain Nicole Vance. I'm recording this on my phone at 37,000 feet because nobody's answering the radio and I need someone to know what happened up here. What's still happening? Flight 772, LAX to Boston Logan. Red-eye departure, 11:47 p.m. Pacific. I wasn't supposed to be on this plane. I've been grounded for 8 months medical leave after the panic attack that nearly put an A320 into the Atlantic. My therapist says I have acute stress response to confined operational environments. The FAA says I'm unfit for command until I complete treatment. My ex-wife says I'm a liability who chose the sky over our marriage. She's probably right about that last part. I bought a coach ticket on my own airline because it was cheaper employee rate, even for grounded pilots. Seat 23C, middle seat, squashed between a college kid who smelled like energy drinks and a woman doing a crossword puzzle in pen. The kind of anonymous misery that's supposed to be therapeutic. Dr. Reyes says I need to experience commercial flight as a passenger, reframe my relationship with aviation from a position of surrender rather than control. Surrender. That's a word that tastes like failure in my mouth. The cabin was maybe 60% full. Off-season Tuesday night, the kind of flight that's mostly business travelers trying to save their company money and insomniacs like me who can't sleep anyway. I counted heads out of habit, 87 passengers. For flight attendants, 2 pilots up front who I didn't recognize. Good. The last thing I needed was someone from my old crew seeing me stuffed into 23C like cargo. Takeoff was smooth. Too smooth. The kid next to me fell asleep before we reached cruising altitude, drooling onto his hoodie. Crossword woman ordered 2 tiny bottles of red wine and knocked them back like medicine. I tried to read, but the words kept swimming, so I watched the safety card instead, memorizing exit rows I already knew by heart. Row 9, row 23, row 42. Overwing, rear galley, rear fuselage. Old habits. The first sign something was wrong came 90 minutes into the flight. I was half dozing, that shallow aircraft sleep where you're never fully unconscious because some part of your brain is still listening to the engines, monitoring the angle of climb, tracking every vibration through the fuselage. That's when the tone changed. Not the engines, the cabin. The intercom chimed. Nobody spoke. Chimed again. Then a third time, that soft 2-note passenger announcement signal that usually precedes drink service or turbulence warnings. But no voice followed. Just the hum of recycled air through the vents and that weird pressurized silence you only get at altitude. Crossword woman glanced up, annoyed. They forget how to talk? I unbuckled, stood up. The college kid's head lolled against the window, a string of drool connecting his mouth to his sleeve. I stepped over him into the aisle. 17 years of muscle memory kicked in immediately. Scan for threats, count exits, identify crew positions. Forward galley, mid-cabin checkpoint, rear service area. The rear galley was empty. No flight attendant prepping drinks, no coffee brewing, no sound of the cart being assembled. The lavatory signs glowed green, unoccupied. But there was a smell in the air, something sharp and organic under the usual jet fuel and recycled air cocktail. Like copper, like meat left too long in the sun. "Excuse me," I called toward the forward cabin. My voice sounded too loud in the quiet. "Flight attendant?" Nobody answered. I walked forward, passengers sleeping, reading, watching seatback screens with headphones on. Normal red-eye behavior. But as I passed row 18, I noticed the man in the aisle seat. His head was tipped back, mouth open, eyes half closed. His shirt was stained dark down the front. Vomit, I thought first, but the color was wrong. Too red, too viscous. "Sir," I touched his shoulder, cold through the fabric. His eyes didn't move, neither did his chest. I checked for a pulse, nothing. No breathing. But his skin wasn't livid yet, wasn't showing the waxy pallor of someone who'd been dead for hours. This was recent, very recent. The smell was stronger here, Copper and rot and something else, something almost sweet like spoiled fruit. I looked at his face more carefully. His lips were cracked and peeling, skin around his mouth discolored in a way that made me think of chemical burns. But there was no obvious trauma, no wounds I could see. I needed to find the crew. Now, the forward galley was behind a curtain marked crew only. I pushed through without hesitation. FAA regulations be damned. What I found made my throat close up. 2 flight attendants on the floor. A woman in her 40s, name tag reading J. Hayes, slumped against the forward lavatory door. A younger man, maybe 30, name tag K. Patel, sprawled across the galley cart. Both had the same discolored mouths, the same reddish-brown staining down their uniforms. Both completely still. Jesus, I whispered. Then louder, hey, anybody conscious up here? The cockpit door was closed. Locked, obviously. Post 9/11 protocols meant it was reinforced steel, could withstand small arms fire, opened only from inside. But there was an intercom panel on the galley wall. I grabbed it, pressed the call button. Cockpit, this is Nicole Vance. I'm a pilot with the airline. I have a medical emergency in the cabin. Multiple casualties. I need you to respond immediately. Static. That's all. Just the hiss of an open channel with nobody on the other end. I tried again. Cockpit, respond. This is an emergency. I have at least 3 passengers down, 2 crew members unresponsive, and I need medical assistance. Acknowledge. Nothing. The cockpit was silent, but the plane was flying straight and level, autopilot engaged, no alarm sounding. Someone had set a course and then… What? Died? Abandoned their posts? There's a protocol for this for incapacitated crew, but it requires someone up front to initiate. If both pilots were down… My hands were shaking. I shoved them in my pockets. Think, Nicole, you're a pilot. You've trained for emergencies. Decompressions, engine failures, rejected takeoffs, you've done it all in the simulator. This is just another emergency. Just another problem to solve. Except I'm grounded. Except I'm medically unfit for command. Except the last time I sat in a cockpit during a crisis, I froze for 8 seconds that felt like 8 hours and nearly killed 183 people. I pressed the intercom again. If anyone is conscious in the cockpit, tap the mic twice. You don't need to talk. Just tap so I know you're alive. 10 seconds of static. 15. 20. Nothing. I turned back to the cabin. From this angle, I could see more passengers in the forward rows. Row 7. Man in a business suit, slumped sideways, absolutely motionless. Row 4. Woman with her head on the tray table, hair covering her face, one hand hanging limp in the aisle. Row 2. Elderly couple holding hands across the armrest, both utterly still. How many were dead? How many had I missed walking forward because they just looked like sleeping passengers? And what the hell had killed them? The smell was everywhere now. I could taste it on the back of my tongue, that copper rot sweetness seeping into my sinuses. My training said contaminated air supply, biological hazard, get oxygen masks deployed. But the masks were manual release from the cockpit or automatic deployment if cabin pressure dropped below 14,000 feet. We were still pressurized. The system thought everything was fine. I went back to the intercom. This is Nicole Vance to any conscious passengers. If you can hear me, I need you to stay calm and stay in your seats. We have a medical situation and I'm working to establish contact with the cockpit. Do not leave your seats. Do not attempt to move forward. I will update you as soon as I have more information. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Good. That's good. Passengers panic when crew panic. Maintain calm. Maintain control, even when everything's going to hell. I needed to count survivors. Needed to know how many people were still breathing, still functional, still able to follow instructions if we had to evacuate or if I somehow got this plane on the ground. I moved back down the aisle, checking each passenger systematically. Row 6, dead. Middle-aged man, same discolored mouth, same stillness. Row 8, alive. Young woman, awake now, staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. "What's happening?" she whispered. "Stay in your seat," I told her. "Don't touch anyone who looks sick. I'm going to get us help." Row 10, dead. 2 passengers sitting side by side, both gone. Row 11, alive. Teenager with headphones on, oblivious, watching a movie on his tablet. I tapped his shoulder. He pulled one earbud out, annoyed. "Listen carefully," I said. "Don't eat or drink anything. Don't touch any surfaces you don't have to. And if you start feeling sick, dizzy, nauseous, anything unusual, you call for me immediately. Understand?" He nodded, fear replacing annoyance. Row 13, alive but barely. A woman in her 50s, conscious, gripping the armrests. Her lips were starting to crack. She looked at me and croaked, "Water, please." "Don't drink anything," I said. "I'm sorry, but until I know what's causing this, no food or water. Can you tell me when you started feeling sick?" She shook her head weakly. "Not sick, just thirsty. So thirsty." Her mouth, Jesus, her mouth looked like she'd been lost in a desert for days. Lips split and bleeding, tongue swollen. How long had she been like this? The flight was only 2 hours in. Nobody dehydrates that fast. I moved on. Had to keep counting, had to know the numbers. By the time I reached row 23, my original seat, I'd counted 19 dead, 42 alive but mostly unconscious, and 26 who seemed unaffected. The college kid next to my empty seat was still drooling peacefully. Crossword woman was awake now, staring at me. "You're the one who made the announcement," she said. "Not a question." "I'm a pilot. I need to get into the cockpit." "You said medical situation. How many dead?" I didn't answer, couldn't. If I said the number out loud, it became real. She stood up, steadier than I expected for someone who just downed 2 wines at altitude. "I'm Dr. Patricia Huang, Emergency Medicine, Boston General. If you've got casualties, I can help." Relief hit me so hard I almost sagged against the seat back. Forward galley. 2 crew members down. At least a dozen passengers with the same symptoms: dehydration, discolored mouths, unresponsive. And we can't raise the cockpit. Dr. Huang's expression went from concerned to professionally grim. "Show me." We went forward together. She knelt next to the flight attendant, checking vitals, pulling back eyelids, examining the mouth discoloration. "This is wrong," she muttered. "This is all wrong. These symptoms don't match any pathogen I've seen. The dehydration is too rapid, the tissue damage too extensive. And look at this." She pointed to the attendant's fingernails. They were purple-black, like frostbite, but the cabin temperature was normal, maybe even slightly warm. "Hypoxia," I suggested. "Oxygen deprivation?" "Maybe, but localized hypoxia doesn't cause oral lesions like this. And if it was systemic hypoxia, we'd all be affected." She stood thinking. "You said you can't reach the cockpit?" "Radio's dead. Intercom's not working. Durchlucht." "There's an emergency access code, isn't there? I've seen documentaries." "There is, but if the pilots are conscious and don't want the door opened, they can override it from inside. And if they're unconscious..." I didn't finish that sentence. Didn't need to. Dr. Huang looked at the cockpit door, then at me. "You need to try." The emergency access panel was on the wall next to the cockpit door, hidden behind a small placard that read "Authorized Personnel Only." I'd used it exactly twice in my career, once during training and once during a medical emergency when the captain had a kidney stone and needed to get out fast. The code was standard across the fleet. Pound 8-7-3-2. I punched it in, heard the electronic lock disengage. Then came the 30-second warning. If the pilots were conscious and alert, they'd hit the override and the door would stay locked. If they didn't respond, the door would open automatically. Dr. Huang and I waited. 20 seconds. 25. 30. The lock clicked. The door swung inward. The cockpit was a tomb. Captain's seat. Male, late 40s, slumped forward against the yoke. First officer's seat. Female, younger, head tilted back, mouth open. Both with the same discolored lips, the same stillness. The instruments glowed softly in the darkness. Autopilot engaged. Altitude holding steady at 37,000 feet. Course heading 075. Direct to Boston Logan. Everything exactly as it should be, except for the 2 corpses strapped into the flight deck. "Oh God," Dr. Huang whispered behind me. I forced myself forward, checked the captain's pulse. Nothing. First officer, nothing. Both cold, both gone. And based on the rigor mortis just starting to set in, they'd been dead for at least an hour, maybe longer, which meant the plane had been flying itself on autopilot for at least 60 minutes with no living crew. I slid into the first officer's seat, trying not to think about the body I was displacing. The instruments looked normal. Autopilot engaged, flight management system active, altitude hold, speed hold, navigation tracking the programmed route. We were approaching the coast, maybe 2 hours from Boston at current speed. But Boston wasn't going to let us land, not if they knew what was happening on board. I grabbed the radio. "Boston Center, this is Flight 772 Heavy. Emergency traffic. How do you copy?" Static. Just static. I tried again on the emergency frequency. Any station. This is Flight 772 declaring an emergency. We have multiple casualties on board. Flight crew incapacitated. Requesting immediate assistance." More static, but this time, underneath it, I heard something. Voices. Distant, distorted, talking over each other. I cranked up the volume. "Flight 772 under quarantine protocols. Do not respond. CDC notification. Possible biological containment. Military intercept authorized. Escort to designated landing zone." My blood went cold. Quarantine protocols. CDC. Military intercept. Dr. Huang was reading over my shoulder, looking at the navigation display. "We're being diverted," she said quietly. "Look at the routing." She was right. The flight plan had been modified. Not by me, not by the dead pilots. Someone on the ground had reprogrammed our destination remotely. We weren't going to Boston anymore. The new waypoint was labeled KPVD, Providence, Rhode Island. TF Green Airport. Smaller field, easier to isolate. "They're quarantining us," I said. "They know something's wrong and they're redirecting the plane away from major population centers." Can they do that? Can they just take control? Modern aircraft have remote override capabilities. It's supposed to be for hijacking situations, prevent another 9/11. But yeah, if they've determined we're a biological threat, they can lock out the cockpit controls and fly us remotely to wherever they want. Dr. Huang went pale. "We're a flying plague ship. We're a potential contamination vector," I corrected. "And they're not taking chances." I tried the radio again. "Boston Center, this is Nicole Vance, qualified captain speaking. We have survivors on board who are unaffected by whatever this is. We need medical support on landing, not military containment. Acknowledge." A different voice this time, clearer. Flight 772. This is CDC emergency response. You are under mandatory quarantine. Do not attempt to override autopilot. Do not deviate from assigned routing. Medical teams will meet you on the ground at Providence. Maintain current altitude and heading. Acknowledge. I acknowledge, I said through gritted teeth. But I need you to understand we have at least 26 healthy passengers, and I'm a qualified pilot. I can land this aircraft. I need you to clear Providence approach and get emergency services ready. We're going to need biohazard containment and medical triage for multiple casualties. Silence. Then, Flight 772, medical teams are standing by. ETA Providence, 93 minutes. Do not leave the cockpit. Do not interact with passengers. Minimize exposure to contaminated air. The transmission cut off. I looked at Dr. Huang. They think we're contaminated. They think we're all infected. Are we? She asked quietly. I don't know. I don't feel sick. Do you? She shook her head. But that doesn't mean anything. Incubation periods can vary. We could be asymptomatic carriers. We could be immune. Or we could just be next. The thought sat between us like a third body in the cockpit. I turned back to the instruments, checking fuel, checking systems, checking anything to avoid thinking about the dead pilots on either side of me. Help me move them, I said abruptly. I need to sit in the captain's seat to land this thing properly. We'll put them in the forward galley. Dr. Huang hesitated. If they're contaminated, moving them could spread whatever killed them. They're already dead, and I need access to the full control panel. Come on. Together, we unbuckled the captain and dragged him backward out of the cockpit. He was heavy, dead weight, awkward to maneuver through the narrow doorway. We laid him next to the flight attendants in the galley. Then the first officer. Her head lolled as we lifted her, mouth falling open. I tried not to look at her teeth, at the way they were stained reddish-black like she'd been drinking old blood. When we got back to the cockpit, I locked the door behind us, sealed ourselves in with the instruments and the controls and the knowledge that we were 2 hours from landing and still had no idea what was killing everyone. I sat in the captain's seat. It was still warm. My hands found the yoke, the throttles, the familiar positions I'd trained for thousands of hours. The muscle memory was immediate, comforting. This was where I belonged. This was what I knew how to do. Talk to me about symptoms, I said to Dr. Huang. You're the medical expert. What are we dealing with? She leaned against the center console, thinking.
Rapid onset dehydration.
Oral and mucosal tissue damage. Possible hypoxia indicated by cyanosis. But the speed is wrong. People don't dehydrate this fast naturally. It's like their bodies are being drained. Poison? Maybe. But what kind of poison works this fast and affects this many people simultaneously? Food poisoning takes hours. Airborne toxins would affect everyone equally. And the distribution pattern is weird. Why are some passengers fine and others dead? I pulled up the passenger manifest on the cockpit display, cross-referencing seat numbers with the casualties I'd counted. No obvious pattern. Dead passengers in first class, coach, exit rows, window seats, aisle seats. Living passengers scattered throughout. No clear demarcation by age, gender, or location. Wait, Dr. Huang said, pointing at the screen. Pull up the meal service records. I didn't have access to catering logs from the cockpit, but the flight attendant tablets might. I radioed back to the cabin. Anyone conscious in the rear galley, I need you to check the flight attendant station. There should be a tablet with meal service information. Can someone bring it forward? A long pause, then a young voice, male, scared. I found it. I'm bringing it up. 30 seconds later, there was a knock on the cockpit door. I opened it just wide enough to grab the tablet from a kid who looked about 19, terrified, holding the device like it might explode. Thank you, I said. Go back to your seat. Stay hydrated if you have your own water bottle. Don't drink anything from the galley." He ran. I pulled up the meal service log. Dr. Huang read over my shoulder, cross-referencing seat numbers with the passenger manifest. Her finger stopped on a list of special meal requests. "Look at this," she said. "Every single passenger who ordered a special meal, vegetarian, kosher, gluten-free, whatever, is still alive. Everyone who ate the standard catered meals is either dead or showing symptoms." My stomach dropped. It was the food. "It was the food," she confirmed. "Something in the standard meal service. Contaminated, poisoned, I don't know what, but that's the vector." I looked at the flight timeline. Meal service would have started about an hour after takeoff, right around the time I'd first noticed something was wrong. Fast-acting poison, distributed through the in-flight meals. Targeted, deliberate, and absolutely terrifying. "This wasn't an accident," I said quietly. "Someone did this on purpose." Dr. Huang's face was grim, which means someone on the ground knew, or someone on this plane. I thought about the dead flight attendants, the dead pilots. They would have eaten crew meals, separate from passenger service but from the same catering supply. If the contamination was deliberate, whoever did it had access to the entire food chain. This was sophisticated. This was planned. And we were still 90 minutes from landing with no guarantee the ground teams would have antidotes or treatments. I grabbed the radio. "CDC emergency response, this is Flight 772. We've identified the contamination vector. In-flight meal service. Standard catered meals only. Special requests unaffected. This was deliberate poisoning. We need toxicology teams ready on landing and immediate analysis of catering company records." "Copy." The response was immediate. "Flight 772. Information received. Diverting toxicology assets to Providence. Catering company being secured now. Continue current approach. Medical teams will have updated protocols." I clicked off the mic and looked at Dr. Huang. "At least they're taking it seriously." "They're taking us seriously," she corrected. "We're still a flying contamination zone. Even if we've identified the source, we've all been exposed to whatever this is. They're not letting anyone off this plane without full decontamination." She was right. I could see it in my mind. The plane landing, being directed to a remote taxiway, surrounded by people in hazmat suits. Everyone on board tested, quarantined, interrogated. And me, grounded pilot, medical leave, panic attack history, trying to explain why I'd taken command of a flight I wasn't certified for. But that was 90 minutes away. Right now, I had a plane to fly and survivors to protect. I disengaged the autopilot, took manual control for the first time in 8 months. The yoke felt good in my hands. Solid. Real. The aircraft responded to my inputs like it remembered me, like we'd never been apart. "Let's get these people on the ground," I said. Dr. Huang nodded. "I'm going back to the cabin. I need to check on the symptomatic passengers, see if I can slow the progression. You fly. I'll keep them alive." She left the cockpit and I was alone with the instruments, the radio chatter, the weight of 87 souls depending on me to get this right. I trained for this my entire career. Simulated emergencies, practiced procedures, memorized checklists. But simulations don't include dead pilots and poisoned passengers and CDC quarantines. Simulations don't include the knowledge that one mistake could kill everyone still breathing. My hands were steady on the yoke. My breathing was even. The panic that had grounded me 8 months ago was nowhere. Maybe because this was real. Maybe because there was no time for panic when people were dying. Or maybe because this was exactly where I needed to be. I pushed the throttles forward slightly, adjusting speed for the approach corridor. Providence was 60 miles out now. I could see the coastal lights appearing on the horizon, the dark mass of Narragansett Bay spreading below us like spilled ink. The radio crackled. Flight 772, Providence approach. We have you on radar, descend and maintain flight level 250. Be advised, you are cleared for direct approach to runway 23. All traffic has been cleared. Emergency vehicles standing by. Flight 772, descending to flight level 250. I acknowledged. Request confirmation. Are we cleared to land, or will we be diverted to holding pattern for decontamination assessment? Flight 772, you are cleared to land. Decontamination will occur on ground. Medical teams in position. I began the descent, feeling the plane respond to every input. Altitude bleeding off, speed stable, heading locked. The familiar rhythm of approach. Check instruments, scan outside, verify position, prepare for landing configuration. Behind me, through the closed cockpit door, I could hear sounds from the cabin. Crying, someone retching. Dr. Huang's voice, calm and professional, giving instructions. The living and the dying, separated by nothing but time and whatever poison was working through their systems. I thought about the dead pilots, about how they'd probably felt the first symptoms and kept flying anyway, following procedures until they couldn't anymore. About how they'd set the autopilot and then just stopped, gave up the fight. I wasn't going to do that. I was going to land this plane and get these people help and then deal with whatever came after. One problem at a time. That's how you fly through emergencies. One problem at a time. At 25,000 feet, the passenger oxygen masks deployed. Not from me, the system was automated, triggered by some failsafe I hadn't seen activate. Yellow cups dropped from overhead compartments throughout the cabin, dangling on their rubber hoses like strange fruit. Dr. Huang's voice came over the intercom immediately. Attention passengers, the oxygen masks have deployed as a precautionary measure. If you are conscious and able, place the mask over your nose and mouth and breathe normally. If you are assisting someone else, secure your own mask first. This is standard emergency procedure. Standard procedure for a decompression event, which this wasn't. But it was smart thinking. Getting oxygen into the symptomatic passengers might slow whatever cellular damage the poison was causing. I made a note to thank her for the quick thinking, assuming we both survived the landing. Providence approach came back on. Flight 772, be advised, military aircraft have been scrambled as escort. You will see them positioning on your wings. Do not be alarmed. This is protocol for quarantine situations. I looked out the cockpit window. Sure enough, 2 F-16s were sliding into formation, one on each side, maintaining perfect distance. Their running lights blinked steadily in the darkness. They weren't there to help us. They were there to make sure we didn't deviate from course. To make sure that if things went completely wrong, they could handle it. To make sure we didn't become a weapon. Flight 772, roger that, I said. Escorts acknowledged. The F-16 pilot came on frequency, voice crisp and military. Flight 772, this is Hammer 1. We have you visual. You are to maintain current heading and descent profile. Any deviation will be met with interception. Acknowledge. Hammer 1, Flight 772 acknowledges. No deviations planned. We just want to land. Roger that, 772. Follow the rules and you'll be on the ground in 30 minutes. Hammer 1 out. 30 minutes. I could do 30 minutes. I'd done thousands of approaches, hundreds of night landings. This was just one more. Ignore the dead pilots in the galley. Ignore the dying passengers in the cabin. Ignore the fighter jets making sure I didn't become a suicide pilot. Just fly the plane. At 15,000 feet, Dr. Huang came back to the cockpit. Her face was drawn, exhausted. We're losing more, she said without preamble. 3 more passengers went into respiratory arrest in the last 20 minutes. I've been doing CPR, but without proper equipment. She trailed off, the unspoken obvious. People were dying and there was nothing she could do to stop it. How many still viable? I asked. 21 conscious and stable. Another 8 symptomatic but breathing. The rest? She shook her head. 58 dead or dying. On a 2-hour flight. From poisoned airline food. The CDC is going to lose their minds, I said. This is going to be the biggest aviation poisoning in history. If it's just aviation, Dr. Huang said quietly. If this was the catering company, how many other flights got contaminated today? How many other planes are flying around right now with dead crews and dying passengers? I hadn't thought of that. The implications were staggering. If this was a coordinated attack on the food supply chain, if multiple flights had been targeted simultaneously, the radio gave me the answer before I could finish the thought. All aircraft, this is FAA Command Center. Effective immediately, National Ground Stop is in effect for all commercial aviation. Flights currently airborne are to proceed to nearest suitable airport. No departures authorized until further notice. This is not a drill. Acknowledge on guard frequency. A ground stop. The entire U.S. airspace system shut down. That hadn't happened since 9/11. And if they were grounding everything, it meant Flight 772 wasn't the only plane in trouble. Jesus, Dr. Huang whispered. How many flights? I didn't answer. Couldn't. The scope was too big, too terrible to process. Someone had weaponized airline food and turned commercial aviation into a delivery system for mass murder. And we were just one flight, one data point in what was clearly a coordinated attack. Providence approach came back. Flight 772. Descend and maintain 5,000 feet. Turn left heading 210. You are number 1 for runway 23. Cleared for visual approach. Flight 772. Descending to 5,000, left to 210, I acknowledged. My voice sounded mechanical, autopilot engaged even though my hands were flying manual. Do the job. Land the plane. Everything else is tomorrow's problem. The lights of Providence spread below us, the airport clearly visible as a bright cluster at the edge of the bay. I could see emergency vehicles lining the taxiways, dozens of them, fire trucks and ambulances and what looked like military transport trucks. They were setting up a perimeter, preparing to quarantine the entire aircraft. At 3,000 feet, I configured the plane for landing. Flaps extended, gear down, speed bleeding off. The aircraft settled into its final approach profile, riding the invisible glide slope toward the runway threshold. The fighter escorts peeled off, pulling up and away now that we were committed to landing. Their job was done. Mine was just beginning. Landing checklist complete, I said to no one. The cockpit felt huge and empty without a first officer to call out the items, to back me up, to share the workload. Just me and the instruments and the weight of all those lives in the cabin behind me. Dr. Huang put her hand on my shoulder. You've got this, Captain. I'm not a captain, I said automatically. I'm grounded. Medical leave. Right now, you're the only pilot on this plane. That makes you captain. She squeezed once, then headed back to the cabin. I'm going to prep the survivors for evacuation. Get us down safe. 1,000 feet. 500. The runway lights rushing up to meet us. Familiar and strange all at once. My hands moved through the flare without conscious thought, pulling the nose up, letting the airspeed bleed off, feeling for the perfect moment when the wheels would kiss the pavement. Touchdown. Smooth as silk. I reversed thrust, engaged the brakes, felt the deceleration pressing me forward into the harness. The plane slowed, slowed, slowed. I turned off the runway onto the taxiway as directed by ground control. Flight 772, exit the runway and hold position on taxiway Charlie. Shut down engines and await ground personnel. Do not, repeat, do not open any doors or attempt to deplane. Acknowledge. Flight 772. Holding on Charlie. Engines shutting down. I pulled the fuel cutoff switches, let the big turbines wind down. The sounds of flight faded. No more engine roar, no more air rushing over the fuselage. Just the tick of cooling metal and the distant wail of emergency sirens. We'd made it. We were on the ground. Alive. Now came the hard part. The biohazard team approached the aircraft like it was radioactive. Personnel in full hazmat suits, positive pressure breathing apparatus, the works. They set up decontamination tents and isolation chambers around the plane, creating a sterile corridor from the aircraft doors to the waiting ambulances. I watched through the cockpit window as they worked. Efficient, professional, terrifying. This was their scenario, the thing they trained for and hoped would never happen. A hot zone on American soil, contaminated aircraft, mass casualties. The radio crackled. Flight 772, this is Ground Medical Command. We are establishing decontamination protocol. You will open the forward door when instructed. Passengers will deplane one at a time in order of medical priority. Critical patients first, ambulatory last. Flight crew will deplane last. Do you understand these instructions? Understood, I said. Be advised, we have approximately 58 casualties, 21 stable passengers, and 8 symptomatic requiring immediate medical attention. 2 pilots deceased, 2 flight attendants deceased. Copy that. 772. We're sending in a medical assessment team first. They will triage and mark passengers. Do not interfere with their work. The forward door opened with a hiss of pressurization. 3 figures in hazmat suits entered the aircraft, carrying equipment I recognized from training videos. Vital signs monitors, contamination detectors, color-coded tags for triage. I heard Dr. Huang's voice explaining the situation, clinical and precise. I stayed in the cockpit, monitoring the evacuation through the security camera feeds. The triage team moved through the cabin systematically, checking each passenger, marking them with tags. Red for critical, yellow for urgent, green for stable, black for deceased. So many black tags. Too many. The symptomatic passengers were evacuated first, carried out on stretchers by hazmat-suited personnel. Then the stable survivors, walking out under their own power but surrounded by medical staff. Each person was guided through the decontamination tent, stripped, washed, given disposable coveralls, then moved to isolation units for observation. 20 minutes later, Dr. Huang appeared at the cockpit door. "They want us out now," she said. She looked exhausted, haunted. "They're leaving the bodies on board for now. Forensic teams will process the aircraft as a crime scene." Crime scene, right? Because this was murder. Mass murder on a scale I couldn't quite process. I stood up from the captain's seat, feeling every one of the last 3 hours in my back and shoulders. My hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. I followed Dr. Huang to the forward door, where 2 hazmat-suited figures waited to escort us out. The decontamination tent was exactly as unpleasant as I'd imagined. Cold water spray from all directions, harsh chemical smell, strangers' hands pulling off my clothes and scrubbing every inch of my skin. They took samples, blood, saliva, hair, labeled them, documented everything. Then the disposable coveralls, paper-thin and institutional white, and the walk across the tarmac to the isolation trailer. Inside, the trailer was divided into individual compartments, each with a bed, a small bathroom, and a window that looked out onto more emergency vehicles. They put me in compartment 7. Dr. Huang was in 8. I could hear her voice through the thin wall, answering questions for what sounded like her 5th or 6th interview. My interviewer was a woman in her 30s, CDC badge clipped to her hazmat suit, tablet in hand. "Captain Vance, I'm Dr. Eleanor Wright with the CDC. I need to ask you some questions about Flight 772. Let's start with when you first noticed something was wrong." I walked her through it. The silent intercom, the dead passengers, the unresponsive cockpit, the meal service correlation, everything I'd observed, everything Dr. Huang and I had pieced together. She typed rapidly, occasionally asking for clarification on timing or specific details. When I finished, she looked up. You said you're not currently certified for flight operations, that you're on medical leave. Here it comes, I thought. That's correct. I was a passenger. I took command when the flight crew became incapacitated. And your medical leave is for? Acute stress response. Panic disorder. I had an incident 8 months ago that resulted in my grounding. She made a note. But you were able to function effectively during this crisis. You flew the approach and landing without incident. You coordinated with ground control and emergency services. That doesn't suggest impairment. I didn't know what to say to that. I did what needed to be done. Yes, you did. She closed her tablet. Captain Vance, I need you to understand something. Flight 772 wasn't the only aircraft affected today. We have reports of contaminated meals on 6 other flights. 4 of those flights had no qualified pilots survive. They crashed, 2 in rural areas, 1 into Lake Michigan, 1 into the Atlantic. Over 900 people dead across all incidents. Flight 772 is the only aircraft that made a successful emergency landing. You saved 29 lives today. 29 people who would have died if you hadn't been on that plane. The number hit me like a physical blow. 900 dead, for planes crashed. And ours, we'd been lucky. We'd had me, grounded and broken but still able to fly when it mattered. The catering company? I asked. Have they identified how the contamination occurred? Dr. Wright's expression darkened. We're still investigating. But preliminary evidence suggests deliberate poisoning at the preparation facility. Someone added a compound to the standard meal components, something that causes rapid cellular dehydration and organ failure. Very sophisticated, very targeted. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. Terrorist attack? We're not using that terminology yet. But yes, that's the assumption. A coordinated attack on multiple flights using compromised food service. The scale is unprecedented. I thought about the dead pilots, about the passengers who'd eaten their meals and never woke up, about the college kid next to me who'd slept through everything because he'd been too broke to buy in-flight food. Random chance, the thin line between life and death. How long do we stay in quarantine? I asked. 72 hours minimum. We need to monitor for any delayed symptoms. Make sure the contamination was limited to the meals and didn't spread person to person. But Captain Vance, she paused, choosing her words carefully. Based on what I've seen in your file and what you accomplished today, I'm recommending your return to active duty. Your medical leave was predicated on your inability to function under stress. Today's events suggest that assessment was incorrect. I stared at her. You're saying I can fly again? I'm saying you never stopped being a pilot. The paperwork will take time, but yes, I'll be filing a report with the FAA recommending your full reinstatement. After she left, I sat on the narrow bed and tried to process everything. 900 dead, for planes crashed. 29 survivors because I'd been in seat 23C instead of somewhere else. Because I'd been grounded and bitter and taking a red-eye to Boston to prove something to myself. Through the wall, I heard Dr. Huang talking to her interviewer. Her voice was steady, professional, running through the medical details with the same precision she'd shown in the cabin. She'd saved lives too, doing CPR in the aisle, rationing oxygen, keeping people calm when everything was falling apart. We'd been strangers 3 hours ago. Now we were survivors of something that would be in history books, analyzed by investigators, studied by security agencies trying to prevent it from happening again. My phone was in a plastic evidence bag on the small table. They downloaded everything from it. My recording, my photos, every digital trace of what had happened. But they'd given it back, decontaminated and powered down. I turned it on. 57 missed calls. Texts from people I hadn't talked to in months. My ex-wife, "Oh my God, Nicole, I saw the news. Please tell me you weren't on that flight." I texted back, I'm okay. Talk later." Then I opened the voice recording I'd started in the cockpit, the one I'd been narrating into while flying approach. My own voice played back, steady and professional. "This is Captain Nicole Vance. Former Captain Nicole Vance. I'm recording this on my phone at 37,000 feet because nobody's answering the radio and I need someone to know what happened up here. Former Captain, past tense, like I'd already given up on ever flying again. But I'd landed that plane. I'd brought 29 people home alive. And tomorrow or next week or whenever they let me out of this quarantine trailer, I was going to get back in a cockpit and prove that the panic attack 8 months ago was just one bad day, not the end of my career." I added a final entry to the recording. "It's 3:47 a.m. We're on the ground in Providence. 29 survivors in quarantine, 58 dead on the aircraft. 4 other planes down across the country. Someone weaponized airline food and turned commercial aviation into a killing zone. But we made it. Against every odd, against protocol and regulations and my own broken mental health record, we made it. This is Captain Nicole Vance, signing off." I saved the file, plugged in the phone to charge, and lay back on the bed. Through the small window, I could see the aircraft on the taxiway, surrounded by investigation teams and forensic equipment. Crime scene tape fluttering in the pre-dawn breeze. The sun would be up soon. A new day. A different world than the one I'd woken up in yesterday. But I was still here, still a pilot, still capable of saving lives when it mattered most. I closed my eyes and let exhaustion take me under. Day 3 of quarantine. The isolation trailer had become almost comfortable in an institutional misery kind of way. 3 meals a day delivered through a pass-through slot, vitals checked every 6 hours, blood draws twice daily. Dr. Wright visited each morning with updates on the investigation. The news was uniformly terrible. 7 flights total had been compromised. The 4 that crashed had killed 892 people. Flight 772's toll had risen to 61 after 3 more passengers died in the hospital from organ failure. Across all incidents, the survival rate for anyone who'd eaten the contaminated meals was less than 8%. The catering facility had been a front. 3 employees, all with false identifications, all disappeared, had systematically poisoned meal components over a 2-week period. The compound they'd used was a modified neurotoxin, designed to cause rapid dehydration and cellular collapse. Sophisticated, custom-synthesized, probably state-sponsored according to the intelligence analysts. No one had claimed responsibility yet. That bothered Dr. Wright more than anything. Terrorist attacks usually involve manifestos, she told me on day 2. Someone wanting credit, making political statements. This was just murder. Efficient, clinical murder of random civilians. Dr. Huang and I talked through the thin wall between our compartments. She was handling quarantine better than I was, probably because emergency room doctors were used to institutional confinement and arbitrary rules. She'd been offered a consulting position with the CDC's bioterrorism response team. She was considering it. "Someone needs to figure out how to prevent this from happening again," she said through the wall on day 3. "The food supply chain is too vulnerable. Too many points of compromise. If 3 people with fake IDs can poison 7 flights, what's to stop a larger operation from hitting dozens? Hundreds? The TSA will probably start inspecting every in-flight meal individually," I said. "Security theater on steroids. It'll add 3 hours to pre-flight preparation and accomplish nothing except making everyone feel safer." "You sound cynical." "I sound realistic. I've been in aviation 20 years. Every attack leads to new security measures that are performative at best. We're still taking off our shoes because of one guy with a shoe bomb in 2001. Now we'll probably have to eat prepackaged, sealed meals that taste like cardboard because 7 flights got poisoned. The actual threat will evolve and we'll be fighting the last war. Through the wall, I heard her laugh bitterly. You're right. God help us, you're right. On day 4, they let me see the other survivors. We were moved to a larger facility, still quarantined, still monitored, but now we could interact in a common room under medical supervision. 29 people who'd survived Flight 772, plus 17 survivors from the other flights who'd been brought to the same facility. The college kid who'd sat next to me, his name was Dylan Ortiz, freshman at Boston University, looked shell-shocked. He'd slept through almost everything, only waking up when the oxygen masks deployed. I didn't buy the in-flight meal, he kept saying. I was broke. I was too broke to buy the $15 chicken wrap. That's the only reason I'm alive. Crossword woman, Dr. Patricia Huang, I could use her name now, was calm, professional, already taking histories from the other survivors. Some had eaten nothing on the flight. Some had brought their own food. Some had special meal orders. All had survived through random chance, arbitrary decisions made hours or days before boarding. There's going to be guilt, Dr. Huang told me quietly. Survivor's guilt. Why them and not me? It'll hit some people immediately, others months or years later. We all need counseling, therapy, someone to process what we went through. I nodded. I'd already been in therapy before this happened. Dr. Reyes was going to have a field day with this session. How are you holding up? She smiled, tired. I'm a trauma surgeon. I'm used to people dying despite my best efforts. But this was different. So many people, so fast, and nothing I could do to save them. I've been having nightmares about the ones in the late stages, the ones who were still conscious, still aware they were dying. The woman in row 13, I said, asking for water. Her name was Linda Kellerman, 53, mother of 2. She died in the hospital on day 1. Her last words were asking if her kids would be told she loved them. Dr. Huang's voice cracked slightly. I made sure they knew. I called them myself. It was the least I could do. We sat in silence for a moment. Around us, other survivors talked quietly, shared stories, tried to make sense of something that would never make sense. Dylan approached us hesitantly. Captain Vance, can I ask you something? I'm not technically a captain, I said automatically. But yes. Did you know you could land the plane? When you went into the cockpit, did you know you could do it? I thought about that, about the 8 months of doubt, the panic attack that had grounded me, the fear that I'd lost my edge and would never get it back, about sitting in the captain's seat with 2 dead pilots in the galley and 29 lives depending on me not freezing up. No, I said honestly. I wasn't sure. I haven't flown in 8 months. I've been grounded for medical reasons. But when I was in that cockpit, when I had to fly, it all came back. The training, the muscle memory, the procedures. I stopped thinking about whether I could do it and just did it. You saved my life, Dylan said quietly. You saved all our lives. I just wanted you to know that I'm going to remember that every day. That someone I didn't know, someone who was just a passenger like me, stood up and did something impossible. I didn't know what to say to that. I settled for, "You're welcome. I'm glad you're okay." He nodded and walked away. Dr. Huang looked at me. He's right, you know. What you did was extraordinary. What we did, I corrected. You kept people alive. You figured out the food connection. You did triage under impossible conditions. We're both heroes, apparently. I don't feel like a hero. I feel like someone who survived something terrible and is trying to process it. Yeah, I agreed. That sounds right. On day 7, they released us from quarantine. Clean bills of health, decontamination certificates, trauma counseling referrals, and instructions to report any unusual symptoms for the next 6 months. We walked out of the facility into a media circus. Cameras, reporters, questions shouted from behind barriers. Dr. Huang and I ignored them all, climbed into a government van that took us to a hotel where we could decompress away from the press. The CDC had set up a support program: counseling, medical monitoring, financial assistance for lost work. They were treating us like the victims we were, but also like potential sources of information for preventing future attacks. In my hotel room, I finally called my ex-wife. She answered on the first ring. Nicole.
Jesus Christ, Nicole.
Hey, Amanda. I'm okay. I'm out of quarantine. I'm fine. I saw you on the news. They're calling you a hero. They're saying you landed a plane full of dead people with fighter jets on your wings. That's mostly accurate. She was quiet for a long moment. You were grounded. You told me you couldn't fly anymore, that the panic attacks had ended your career. I thought they had, but when it mattered, when people needed me to fly, I could. I did. The FAA is reinstating you. I saw that too. Full clearance. Commendation for actions under extraordinary circumstances. You're getting your life back. I never lost my life, I said. I just lost confidence. There's a difference. I'm proud of you, Amanda said quietly. I know we're divorced. I know we didn't end well, but I'm proud of you. You did something impossible, and you saved people, and you proved everyone wrong who said you couldn't fly anymore. Thank you, I said. My voice was rough. That means a lot. We talked for another 20 minutes, catching up on 8 months of estrangement, on her new job and my therapy, and the complete insanity of surviving a terrorist attack at 37,000 feet. When we hung up, I felt lighter. Not healed, I'd need months of therapy to process everything, but lighter. The FAA reinstatement came through 10 days later. Full flight privileges restored, medical clearance granted, commendation added to my permanent record. I was offered my old job back, captain position on regional routes with a path to long-haul international. I accepted. Dr. Huang took the CDC position. We stayed in touch, texts and occasional phone calls. Two people bonded by shared trauma and the knowledge that we'd looked at something terrible and survived it together. Dylan Ortiz went back to Boston University. He changed his major to emergency management. Last I heard, he was volunteering with disaster response organizations, turning his survival into purpose. The investigation into the catering facility attack continued. 3 suspects were identified through DNA evidence and international intelligence cooperation. All 3 were dead, killed in what looked like planned suicides to prevent interrogation. The organization behind them remained unknown. The motive remained unclear. Just 7 flights, 953 dead, and no explanation beyond clinical, efficient murder. Aviation security changed overnight. In-flight meal service was suspended across all carriers for 6 months. When it resumed, every meal was individually sealed, prepared in transparent facilities with enhanced security and constant monitoring. The TSA added food safety specialists to every major airport. Ticket prices increased to cover the new costs. But people kept flying, because that's what humans do. We see something terrible, we grieve, we adapt, and we keep moving forward. The alternative is letting fear win. 3 months after Flight 772, I flew my first commercial route since reinstatement. LAX to Seattle, routine flight, perfect weather. As we pushed back from the gate and I ran through the pre-flight checklist with my first officer, I felt something I hadn't felt in almost a year. Complete confidence. Not arrogance. Not recklessness. Just the solid certainty that I knew how to do this job, that I could handle whatever emergencies arose, that I was exactly where I belonged. The takeoff was smooth. The flight was uneventful. The landing was textbook perfect. And when we parked at the gate and I shut down the engines, I allowed myself a moment of quiet satisfaction. I'd come back from grounding, from panic attacks, from surviving something that had killed hundreds of others. I'd proven to myself and everyone else that one bad day doesn't define a career. I was a pilot. That hadn't changed. That would never change. As I walked through the terminal toward my hotel, I passed a newsstand with magazines displaying coverage of the Flight 772 anniversary. 3 months of investigations, memorials, security reforms, and endless speculation about motive and prevention. My photo was in some of the articles. Hero pilot lands poisoned flight. I didn't stop to read them. I knew what had happened. I'd lived it. The rest was just documentation, necessary for history but not something I needed to relive. Dr. Huang called that evening. "Hey, Captain, how was the flight?" "Perfect," I said. "Completely boring. Best flight of my life." She laughed. "That's how they should all be. Boring and safe." "How's the CDC work?" "Frustrating. We're trying to secure the food supply chain against future attacks, but it's like plugging a dam with our fingers. Too many vulnerabilities, too many access points. But we're making progress. Slowly. Keep at it. Someone needs to." We talked for a while longer about work and therapy and the weird celebrity that had come with surviving something newsworthy. Neither of us liked the attention, but we'd learned to manage it. When I hung up, I looked out the hotel window at the Seattle skyline, at the lights of the airport in the distance, at the planes taking off and landing in their endless rhythm. All those people flying somewhere, trusting the crew and the aircraft and the systems we'd built to keep them safe. Most of them would never know how close aviation had come to complete collapse, how 7 flights and 953 deaths had nearly destroyed public confidence in commercial air travel, how security measures and investigation protocols and international cooperation had prevented it from happening again. Most of them would just board their flights, eat their sealed meals or bring their own food, and arrive safely at their destinations. That was exactly how it should be. I closed the curtains, set my alarm for the morning flight, and went to bed. Tomorrow would bring another route, another plane, another chance to do the job I trained my entire adult life to do. I was Captain Nicole Vance. I'd survived Flight 772. I'd landed a plane full of dying passengers with fighter jets on my wings and the CDC on the radio and every reason to panic. And I'd do it again if I had to. But mostly, I hoped I'd never have to. End recording. Final note. This account was compiled from Captain Vance's personal recording, CDC interview transcripts, and subsequent testimony to the FAA Investigation Board. All names and details have been verified. Flight 772 remains the only contaminated aircraft to successfully complete an emergency landing during the 2024 aviation poisoning attacks. The investigation into the organizing entity remains open.